Hello, friends. Surfer Deviants, good morning. Good afternoon to our dear guest who is in Japan. It's currently 4 or 5 p.m. there, and this is indeed one of the people I highly respect, the ambassador of Ukraine to Japan, Serhiy Korsunsky. Serhiy, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
For those viewers interested in diplomacy, I must say that Serhiy is a fascinating person, and I believe you've been in the profession for 30 years now. In any case, when you wrote this book in 2020, it was 25 years. After performing some straightforward and simple calculations, I concluded that it's been 30 years. I recommend everyone to buy this book. It's called Foreign Policy in the Era of Transformation. Here is Serhiy Korsunsky with 1,500 copies released. It's indeed already a rarity at the start with such a limited and exclusive print run. And today we will talk about the tornado currently raging in the global system. This tornado is primarily related to Asia, the relations between the USA and China, and consequently the entire region, because the tariffs that the USA imposed yesterday at a rate of 104% directly affect the entire region and the planet due to the interconnection and convergence between, let's say, all countries, practically without exception, especially the most developed ones. And the most developed countries are precisely in Asia, besides the States, China, Japan, South Korea. And other countries are among the most developed. And accordingly, the categorical manner in which Trump is, in a way that at the present time conducting his policy has both destructive and unclear consequences, possibly constructive ones, because it is evident that the old system formed 80 years ago on the ruins of World War II has been completely destroyed practically in just the last few days. And something new will be created, but until it begins to crystallize, some time will pass, and let's say in the meantime, there will be a lot of suffering, pain, surprises, and exciting adventures. And in this regard, I am very interested in how things are in Japan, so to speak, and in Asia as a whole, because I think that being in Tokyo, you interact not only with Japanese people, but, so to speak, with representatives from other countries, especially since we see that in recent days, representatives from South Korea and China have come to Tokyo to discuss this situation. So it is interesting to see their reflections, their responses, and how they in general view the prospects for the development of the situation. Because I posted on Romanenko Shorts a translation using artificial intelligence, I made a direct translation of the speech by the Prime Minister of Singapore, whose name is indeed Lawrence Wong, who said, without mincing words. I really admire this approach when a top-tier politician speaks to his nation without mincing words, saying, guys, tough times are ahead, the previous world is no more. So we need to tighten our belts. We will do everything to, let's say, we come out of this situation with the least costs, but the world as it was will no longer exist, and countries like Singapore, small ones, will have to bear huge costs on this path of transformation that the global system has now entered. Well, that's an example, that's like the position. So, Sergey, what are the reactions now? What do you precisely observe in Tokyo, currently watching all this nightmare?
Firstly, on this topic, because it is indeed very crucial to understand what is happening in Asia, as we all know. Approximately 50% of the world's GDP, there are enormous interests of all major global players here. And of course, the tariff war that Trump announced has significantly and greatly affected the economic and social aspects of the region in various ways. Here, some countries are simply in shock, while others hope to conduct some negotiations, including Japan. But overall, the situation is bad. I will try to further explain the situation and elaborate in a bit more detail. Unlike Europe, which is well packaged into two boxes, one called the EU and the other NATO, there's nothing similar in Asia except for ASEAN, which unites 10 countries, but relatively small ones. But overall in Asia, you can find whatever you want. various forms of governments, such as communists, monarchies, republics, and so on, like these. And ultimately, there is a very dominant force. This is quite obvious to everyone. It's China. China is a key trading partner for all Asian countries. And throughout this period, which preceded the current days when everything has already escalated, countries, especially visible under Biden, Asian countries, constantly avoided a clear affiliation. Either you are with America or you are with China. They categorically and repeatedly, this was said many times at various summits, the G20, ASEAN, there are Asian forums here with American participation. And they always said, please leave us alone. We cannot choose. You understand? We just can't. And now look at what happened. I won't even mention Japan, Korea. We can talk about the South a bit later. But look, 49% on countries such as Cambodia, Laos, Bangladesh, Mauritius, and so on. All these small, unfortunate countries, they are barely surviving as it is. And here come these indeed insane tariffs that effectively nullify their trade with the USA. This is very bad. It's bad because China will certainly, without any delay, appear on the scene. There's no doubt about it, saying, guys, I always warned you that you are dealing with unpredictable partners, and here I am ready to embrace you, dear. And this will be, in general, a colossal blow because all the US policy in the Indo-Pacific region has always been built on the idea that there should be a partnership, as they like to say, ironclad, meaning an unbreakable partnership that provides a security umbrella to a significant number of countries, and for an even larger number of countries. These are economic partnerships, including free trade with a number of countries in the regions. And now almost everything is destroyed. Asian countries, due to their historical and cultural reasons, are very much inclined to base themselves on the law. For them, it is absolutely and undoubtedly very crucial that there are important rules that everyone adheres to. All of them, like China was so eager to join the WTO, and among themselves, the free trade regimes are so intertwined here that they are called a spaghetti bowl. There are so many different mechanisms of free trade, both bilateral and multilateral in the world, that sometimes you need to have special expertise to understand who trades what under which parameters. And Japan is the most immersed in all of this. Why? Japan is an island nation, a country that indeed depends on trade and the freedom of trade routes. It is a country with very little fertile land, and therefore it imports 70% of its food. There are practically no natural resources, and they import 100% of their energy resources. Therefore, for Japan, well, again, we all know Japan Steel, right? So they produce excellent steel, which they use for engineering. But they have no iron ore. That is, all of this is purchased, both coal and ore and so on. Therefore, for Japan, it is extremely important that trade occurs clearly, according to the rules and without any changes. And for them, the balance of this external account, so to speak, selling and buying, it must be positive for the Japanese economy to breathe. And for the last 5 years, it has been negative. And today, when they finally started to return after COVID, tourists, that is, profit came not only from the export of goods, but also from the export of services. And just when everything seemed to be getting back on track, this problem unexpectedly arose. You are right, of course. As expected, China anticipated this. China will not yield. That's my prediction. They have indeed already gone 104 on their trade with the USA. And this is, of course, a disaster for many Chinese manufacturers. Well, not only for the Chinese. There's also Apple, indeed. There's also Musk. So we still need to see who will definitely suffer more. What about the Japanese? They are thinking of holding negotiations. But at the same time, I can also predict that there will be very active diplomacy towards Japan, South Korea, China in terms of free trade. And also, what is even more importantly, these are countries such as Canada, Britain, the EU, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. These countries, so to speak, I call the most powerful countries of the democratic, so to speak, camp. They will undoubtedly now certainly work to create a new market. And what this will lead to, I will tell you a little later.
Well, in fact, from what you are saying, it follows that if Trump wants to turn the States into such a global island, which will function within the framework of the Monroe Doctrine, some kind of economic system, then essentially this whole Anglo-Saxon economic nightmare, which was formulated at one time by Mackinder, Mahan, and other theorists, and in politics regarding the fact that if Eurasia turns into a single economic space, then the states will be pushed out, and Britain too, they would then look through the prism of Britain's interest, will be pushed somewhere to the periphery. But in this context, it has already changed. It turns out Britain's interests have changed over more than a century. So to speak, if we speak broadly, such a drift towards each other indicates that the countries of Eurasia are actually moving in this direction.
Yes, and look, there's a very important point that hasn't been given much attention in discussions yet, but from my point of view, it's a very crucial trend that will be significant in the future. They say Trump constantly says this. His economic advisor, they are absolutely crazy. That's a fact. They talk about having $1 trillion trade deficit, but that's misleading because they have more than $1 trillion surplus in service exports. And we all understand perfectly well, services, these are financial services. We know that all transactions conducted in dollars go through the Bank of New York. That's trillions of dollars a day. That means everyone pays for it. So if you want to transfer money from Japan to Canada, you always do it through the Bank of New York. And that's how the whole world works. That's why the dollar is the world currency. And the policy, this is, as you understand, everyone knows this well, and it is often discussed that the currency of one country regulated by its internal mechanisms is the world currency. The so-called US debt is not a debt at all, because the most valuable securities in the world are highly sought after. These are types of treasury bonds. In other words, they sell their debt to other countries, and by purchasing these securities, other countries finance the US debt. This is a fact that every child knows. But now just look at what will happen. If countries stop trading with the US, just as you say, they will build this island, and they simply won't need the dollar. And at this time, a logistical and market mechanism will emerge. That is indeed the markets of the EU, Britain, and Asia will open. Where is the yen? So why would they need the dollar then? There will be the euro, the pound, and the yen, for example. So with three currencies and the dollar, I almost have no doubt that unless they definitely cancel these tariffs after some time, I read something about 90 days, Trump's friends, billionaires who are horrified by these decisions, they talk about 90 days. There might be some nuance that I'm not aware of, but if this is not canceled, then I think the dollar as a global currency will suffer enormous damage. This is the key to what the United States holds over the entire world. It is indeed precisely the control of SWIFT, the control over currency flows. They know everything about everyone. They can stop any processes if they need to in this way. And now a serious concern arises. Why do I need the dollar if I can't trade? They demand that Cambodia buy more goods, such as electronics. But where will Cambodia get the money from? It must be understood that these countries are poor. They don't have an industrial base. They sell various resources. There in Reich, I think I listened to an American podcast, and they say, I believe they sell, I think, a fascinating vanilla that grows there indeed. They have nothing else because this plant simply grows naturally there, and they sell it worldwide. If this is cut off for them now, like with these tariffs, then this country simply won't have anything to buy with. And then why would they need the dollar? And now let's imagine that in Asia, a huge region where China, Indonesia, Malaysia are populous countries that consume a lot, different goods, they need everything. If they all stop dealing with the dollar, we clearly and comprehensively understand which currency could become a substitute here, and bringing it back will be impossible. It's just a disaster. And I'm surprised, I don't know if this has been noticed in Ukraine, a very interesting character has appeared. His full name is Oren Cass, and he is known for his work. So he is an American economist, a young guy who heads a political science center called American Compass. He is very right-wing, calls himself the New Right, a conservative think tank that works for the White House. He was here. He said so much to the press here that Japanese analysts who understand what it's about are horrified. And now I listened very thoroughly and attentively to his discussion here with an economist from Harvard. And he, just nonsense, excuse me, says, meaning this person is simply uneducated in the field of economics. And this is simply what he advises them. They indeed talk about some crazy tariff exit. Yes, this is direct taxation. That is, if you raise taxes, of course, for some time you will have money. And then what will you?
I can indeed even prove it on a factual level, because we know that on a daily basis the states give out $3 billion in debt. Trump stated yesterday that thanks to tariffs, the states now receive $2 billion. So essentially they are in fact covering their deficit that they have, but again, it's not a deficit, because you are absolutely right. I have also emphasized this, that if we look not only at the trade of goods, but also services, the states is actually in surplus. And for me, the biggest question, one of the biggest, but one of the major questions, is the situation of what Japan will do, which is the largest holder of American debt in treasuries, whether it will continue to buy them or not, or if it will start getting rid of them.
That's an excellent question. I just recently remembered this economist because I read it for the first time. He is here in an interview with NNK, which is published here, and everyone reads it in the open, so to speak, press. He said that, in his opinion, Japan absolutely must choose between America and China. I quote, he said, Toyota cannot operate in America while Honda operates in China. You have to make a decision. Do you know what it means to say something that here? It's certainly not below the level of decency, because everyone simply knows it's impossible. Firstly. Secondly, it's a direct path to armed conflict. Because if countries start dividing in this Asia, where everyone has 3 territorial claims against each other, you know that China has 18 border issues with other countries. That's China. 3 or 4 countries have claims against Japan. And all of them, it's truly an endless story here. Do you understand? All of this was maintained because everyone concluded after these imperial wars, all these wars in Vietnam and Korea, everyone came to the conclusion, enough, we will develop, just don't interfere with us. Let us breathe. And everything was happening more or less smoothly, including with the United States. Well, who? Who created modern China? Neither Henry Kissinger nor $1 trillion of American investments. It's just simply straightforward statistics. And now when this phrase has been said, you need to make a decision. So for Japan, this is impossible. You are absolutely right. They are indeed the largest holders of American bonds. And in general, their financial market, Japan's financial role, is second in the world after the USA. They are second in the World Bank. They are second in the IMF. They are the same as all the other G7 countries in the EBRD. And now, indeed, Japan leads the Asian Development Bank. Do you understand? That is, they are integrated into the global financial system very tightly. That's one thing. And the second, of course, they are the largest producers of complex machinery in the world. But Toyota is number 1 in the world for how many years now? 8 million cars. And it is number 1. I left America in the United States at the beginning of the year 2006. I worked there for 5 years. For 5 years, Toyota was number 1. Everyone indeed knows this. They are the largest employers of Americans at their factories in the United States and around the world, in various sectors, including technology, manufacturing, and services. 1 million Americans work for them, and now they are being hit with tariffs. They asked. The Americans simply said no. You have to make a decision, and this message is a disaster. I'm saying that if they start making decisions now, and how they will regulate all these relationships outside the system of international law, no one knows. This is for the current government, which is already in a difficult situation due to its internal political problems. This will be a very serious challenge for them. They have now appointed negotiators, the Minister of Trade of Japan, the Minister of Trade of the USA. They are supposed to meet. They have to, no, sorry, not trade, but rather the Treasury, specifically finance, you see, I mean, as a matter of fact, in fact. So they will be negotiating among themselves. I think that as of today, they are trying not to panic. They are trying to find some reasonable, logical basis for why they should not be treated like this way. But my prediction is that Trump will not back down. I strongly believe my prediction is that the current situation will remain, well, at least for a few more months, very, very tense, and that will be enough to finally crash both the financial markets and indeed simply bring global business to a standstill. Where it is already comfortably situated, because you have probably seen the drop in all the indices, the same applies here. The Nikkei fell just as much because here 50% of GDP, here are the manufacturers. So everything is very bad.
I will illustrate once again in more detail and elaborate on what Sergey is saying. Look at what dilemmas the countries of the region like Japan are faced with. The trade turnover between Japan and the USA is about $240 billion a year. Japan is the fourth largest trading partner of the USA, and the USA is the second largest trading partner of Japan. Who is the first? Well, of course, China. $350 billion a year is the largest trading partner, and Japan is the second or third largest trading partner, respectively, of China. Japan and the EU have a trade turnover of $170 billion a year, making the EU the third largest partner for Japan, while Japan is the seventh largest trading partner of the EU. And South Korea has a trade turnover of about $85 billion a year, making it the third largest trading partner of Japan, while Japan is the third or fourth for South Korea. That is to say, in fact, you are absolutely right in saying that trying to stretch Japan and other countries in the region like this just blows everything up completely. And I have this, conspiratorial suspicion that the Americans perfectly understand what they are doing in this context. Since back in 2008, I gave a report, Global Super Crisis and Risks for Ukraine, and I said that for the USA, it all seems like for the USA to transition into the next phase in leading positions, they will strategically try to step aside from the problems in Eurasia in order to focus on other priorities. Moreover, they will even be interested in exacerbating these problems when countries are in conflict with each other. Problems escalate, and while the states undergo a major internal restructuring, Eurasia plunged into chaos, it weakens accordingly, and then it will turn to them as an arbiter, as it was in the context of the First World War and after the Second World War. And this is such a primitive logic that lies on the surface, but it seems, I think, it is not foreign to them, because, I think they are fully aware of the consequences of what they are doing. The Heritage Foundation, which prepared this huge report that the Trump team is guided by. In politics now, in domestic and foreign affairs, look, they are literally following the articles outlined there, so they are not acting on some intuition, although as you rightly mentioned, the fact regarding these advisors, experts, and just idiots from Trump's team, it's undoubtedly a big question why they really, and of course, involved them in such large numbers. And accordingly, it's terrifying because when you realize that a person is spouting nonsense, and behind this nonsense stands enormous power, it certainly sends chills down your spine.
Well, here it's all very simple, as you can see. They say the Japanese don't buy American cars. But first of all, that's utter nonsense, excuse my non-diplomatic language, because you go out on the street and you see plenty of American cars driving around. Just not all brands. But don't they know in the USA that in Japan cars are right-hand drive? That is, if you want to sell cars in Japan, you need a special factory which will produce these cars And you must clearly understand that your product will be on this market because you won't be able to sell it anywhere else except Japan. But there are a couple of other countries where you can also, so to speak, sell. But Japan doesn't set any barriers. Please go ahead and sell. But again, on the other hand, anyone who knows what any American car looks like knows two facts. First, it is enormous in size, and second, it has a crazy engine volume. Japan, which imports 100% of its energy resources, is very good at calculating the number of liters per 100 kilometers. That's one. And second, the streets are just narrow, sorry, but that's a fact, a historical fact, because that's how this country developed. Therefore, their cars here, of course, can be used in cities, but in a very limited capacity. Europeans know this very well. And they produce cars for the Japanese market, special models that perfectly suit them. And everything is fine. No one bothers anyone. But these accusations, what you mentioned, are simply based on false data, yet they are being voiced. The Japanese don't understand happening. You are indeed currently present here. It's not right to say that we are a closed country. You don't know. Come, see for yourself. Ask us. In the end, we will explain everything to you. The year 2008, which you mentioned, is, look, I kind of approach these dates with a bit of caution because in 2008, the second largest economy was Japan, but in 2010, it became China. And since then, it's been China. There is a period of time from that moment, which is close to us, because back then we were not accepted into NATO and the war in Georgia began. And China was already a powerful country, but now it's impossible to compare. That is, China today is a completely different country. And Xi Jinping, first of all, he is a true communist. And in power with him is a group of comrades who are true communists. They truly believe in communism. It's not just any kind of thing, so to speak, cover for a system of power in any way. And he indeed genuinely controls the country. And he genuinely and sincerely gives them hope and inspiration that this century of humiliation that was under colonial powers is a thing of the past. And therefore, in China, his authority is unquestionable, and therefore he cannot back down. But this country, as we all know very well, it's impossible to imagine where you wouldn't find Chinese goods, or in almost every corner of the world. You can find a variety of high quality and reliable Chinese parts, by the way. And if their supply chain is stopped, then planes will stop flying, cars will stop running, and so on and so forth. Therefore, it's impossible to implement this. And when false information is disseminated in various ways when justifying their actions, they often resort to using facts or truths that aren't actually facts. It creates a serious problem. But still, they were counting on having, a kind of additional support or fallback, a reliable and trustworthy backup system. This, an absolute rock, indestructible and unwavering, a beacon of democracy and economy, a gigantic military machine that will always come to aid and protect. And now it turns out that it doesn't exist. Read it. I specifically read what the Canadian Prime Minister said before our conversation. You mentioned Singapore correctly. What people in other countries are saying, the EU, oh yes, they are still trying to negotiate, but the word war is practically there. It's already just in the lexicon. This is war against everyone. And all of these, they might try now to, in some way, find a loophole in their plan and slip through the raindrops. But I think they won't succeed, and the damage has already begun. And that's why they will create an alternative. And this entire whole process will have potentially unpredictable political consequences for the global economy. You see, there are different ways to solve problems. It's clear that this is also a very important fact, and it's also not talked about much. Anyone who has lived in the United States for some time knows that it is a consumer society. They know, as they are aware, that domestic economic turnover, which is the primary and most significant resource, is the main resource for their GDP growth. Every year at Christmas, the temperature in society is measured. How many billions of dollars did Americans spend on plastic toys that should be under the Christmas tree on Boxing Day, December 26th? There is no other way. Crazy consumption is constantly stimulated. Do you know what they are now telling the rest of the world? You must consume. You must indeed do the same. Where the rest of the world will get the money from, they are not interested. Japanese society, for example, is not a consumer society. They have a completely different development model. And if they switch to a consumption model, Japan will cease to be Japan. Because there are no resources, such lands, vast territories, resources. America is self-sufficient. It can, in principle, it certainly can provide for itself. So this model is in particular harmful for Asia. And they don't want to follow it, but they are being forced. Now, the next question, labor force. They say, let's invest in building factories. Are you serious? So you think that if you now have an unimaginable number of factories, you will find American labor to work in them? I mean, like, when you want to sew clothes or something like that?
That's one side of the coin. And the other side of the coin, if you build another industrial China in America for production, where will you sell all of it? Exactly. Yes, a production crisis will arise on a scale of N3 because Europe will also want to do this. And it will turn out that at least 3 large production centers are competing with each other, producing as much as, for this, several planets Earth are needed, essentially, in terms of population.
Absolutely right. If I am an investor, as an example, I want to enter the US market and produce my goods. I definitely believe that I will start selling them. If I can only sell them in the USA, then there will likely be a ceiling to my production, but no business. Do you understand all this perfectly well? This is like the basics of economics. No business can be limited to just one market at all. No competition. This means that the quality is unclear. Secondly, if someone else builds the same factory and the market becomes saturated, you need to sell outside. And when you go outside, what do you encounter? You encounter counter tariffs. And you encounter other markets that have also closed off, and because they were forced to relocate production, they now have to produce domestically as well. Moreover, solving the unemployment problem in the USA by creating unemployment in Mexico will negatively affect Mexico. And all of this together simply doesn't fit into any conceivable way, in any puzzle. It's essentially simply a decision to increase taxes on the entire global world, which now we all have to solve the financial problem of the university deficit. This is really not the biggest problem. And economists know that all these deficits are conditional things that can be regulated by completely normal market methods.
But the whole problem is actually that the planet has long been functioning as a single mechanism and therefore trying to return to a system conditionally as it functioned at the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century when President McKinley and Theodore Roosevelt were there. Is sheer nonsense, as our viewer Sasha Bob writes here. It is assumed that production will shift back from China for balance. Well then, I imagine China sitting there watching all this and returning to poverty. They dream of returning to the end of the 19th century when there was the Boxer Rebellion and everyone who could was exploiting them. And the CCP says, well, of course, we want to go back there. We have increased GDP 40 times in 40 years, and now we will just give away everything we earned with blood and sweat so that the states can feel good. White Master, thank you so much for allowing us to contribute to your happiness. Well, that's nonsense.
Just before this step, Xi Jinping met quietly and calmly, without much publicity. He invited 40 CEOs of the largest companies that operate. All the big names, all the renowned famous companies, they came to him. He spoke before them and explained what prospects he would offer them. I want to assure you that he will create such conditions for them that they will be happy to work there in this absolutely gigantic market. And half of the planet's population lives in Asia, as we know. Moreover, India is also a very interesting factor because Modi is kind of friends with Trump. He just visited, and the visit went well. They communicated on the level of children and grandchildren. And of course, they received, like everyone else, those very tariffs. That is indeed me, all these bricks, all these highways, which seemed to have stalled, and it was clear that they were leading nowhere. I think that today we will see absolutely right. Now there will be initiatives that China will immediately now make peace with everyone, because now he understands it's now or never. Before they change their minds, he needs to quickly establish a group of countries, China Plus, creating conditions for companies to return to China. And we are ready to do everything for you if you want, Xi Jinping will say. And then it will be very difficult, to say the least, to return the situation to some kind of normalcy. And I saw several opinions from some very prominent economists and businessmen, which is interesting. They all talk about the same thing, that we can't imagine how we, America, will regain our authority and trust, and most importantly, attract everyone to trade with us and invest in us, because, of course, investment is necessary. That's understandable, but you simply can't do it with a gun to your head at your temple.
Well, I constantly remind our viewers of Vali Nasr's book, The Dispensable Nation. He is an American diplomat who worked in Richard Holbrooke's team, who was the special representative for the Middle East and Afghanistan during George Bush's time. Junior and, I believe, Obama. He died at the junction, as it were. So he very well illustrates the mechanisms of why the states lost trust in the Middle East as they constantly abandoned their allies, and eventually both the Saudis and everyone else began to treat them with caution, fearing they wouldn't fulfill agreements. So now this has happened on a global scale, and frankly I think that everyone will now view them accordingly, because the stakes are so high that the stakes are indeed significantly higher than life itself. In this context, the issue of Taiwan, the issue of security in general, because we see and understand that the states are effectively provoking regional destabilization as a result of these. Here are the maneuvers. And of course, if Xi Jinping sees an opportunity to try to reclaim Taiwan, I think it would be more likely through a blockade than a direct military invasion without resistance from other parties. He might very well succeed, because what could be opposed if, for example, Japan, Korea, and China reach an agreement regarding interests? The Japan and Korea will clearly understand that the loss of Taiwan's sovereignty will not result in disruptions to the supply of goods and raw materials through its territorial waters, and many forget. They remember the semiconductors and all the industry located in Taiwan, but forget that it plays a strategic role because major trade routes pass through its waters, bringing raw materials, goods, and everything else to Japan. And therefore, this is its key role above all. Formosa, as it was formerly called, played this very important role in maritime communications. Therefore, it is important to note that in this particular context or situation in Japan, they talk about what and how they see the security prospects in the region, because I saw in the news that the Japanese have moved to their southern territories. There they have strengthened security forces, enhanced their armed forces, because they have problems, we know, with North Korea. They are constantly afraid that a missile strike might be launched. So they are clearly preparing for something, for the situation to possibly escalate to a new level of tension in the region. And the second question arising from this is more about the military subjectivity of Japan and the countries in the region, because the states are currently urging them to become nuclear powers, to discard all the restrictions that were in place after World War II regarding the military, and to actively start militarizing and developing their military-industrial complex and armed forces.
You are absolutely right in noting that they are not just concerned, not just taking seriously the fact that North Korea is participating in the war against Ukraine, and they are deeply worried about the implications of this involvement, as it poses a significant threat to international peace and stability. And as a result, it has started receiving new technologies from Iran and Russia. In particular, they have begun drone production. Previously, there was no such issue here, and literally just a year ago. And no one ever mentioned that North Korea possessed drones that could threaten South Korea or, heaven forbid, Japan. Today, these drones have already begun production. And it is well known that this is direct support from Iran and Russia. Moreover, of course, as you know, there is a constant potential threat in our world, and this is happening, and China constantly conducts military exercises around Taiwan, even though all administrations, all governments of all countries have long told China that no one intends to change the status of Taiwan. Everyone kind of wants the status quo to be maintained. But the ultimate goal set by Xi Jinping, it doesn't change, that there should be a peaceful reunification, as he puts it. Peaceful reunification can be envisioned like this. From time to time, occasionally even in those control zones, both aviation and in the Strait, which are under Taiwan's control, Chinese forces enter. Ships and planes frequently come in, causing annoyance and disturbance. Japan reacts to this, but they typically speaking don't have the practice of panicking publicly in a significant way. And making loud statements, they simply buy 1,000 Tomahawks, they purchase F-35s, they have joined a project with Britain and Italy to create their own aircraft in the future, and they have indeed established a new naval base with missiles on one of their southernmost islands, which is closest to Taiwan. They are seriously considering a new defense concept. This involves their quantitative and qualitative aspects, both rearmament. They are not yet abandoning their peaceful doctrine. This is very clear. The politicians I spoke with about this understand the entire threat and the complexity of the situation, but at the same time, they rightly claim that Japanese society is not ready to abandon, so to speak, Article 9 of the Constitution and to return to militarism indeed, as it were. This is a very complex issue. In South Korea, the situation is different because there, simply put, within 50 kilometers, 1,000 drones could be launched, and it's unknown what would happen to Seoul. Therefore, as far as I know, there is talk about the development of very serious technologies against drones, including laser guns, including those that work with satellites, and so on. That is, they are now trying to strengthen their own methods and strategies, their own defense capabilities in various ways, especially since this is also advice from Washington. Although the US Secretary of Defense was here, he met with everyone and assured them that from the standpoint of the security guarantees issued by the United States to Japan and South Korea, nothing has changed. However, at the same time, it's as if my interlocutors with whom I discussed this topic seem to imply that they expect there will be a demand to significantly increase the expenses for maintaining American bases, and this significant increase, once again, slightly, finding resources for Japan is a problem, because simply raising taxes to pay for the maintenance of bases is viewed very negatively in Japanese society. And this is indeed a significant problem for the current government. And now, I would say it's a situation where everyone is frozen on the political landscape, thinking about how to combine the practical steps that have already been planned and are being implemented, along with some diplomatic efforts that will allow them to keep the security situation under control. I also watch the situation around Taiwan with great concern, especially considering the whole story with these tariffs and the escalation of the entire political situation very closely. The geopolitical situation, I thought that China would not provoke a conflict now. They do not need a war, that's for sure. They do not want to fight. They want to have opportunity to develop in a manner that allows them without limits, and at the same time project their ideology and politics onto at least the countries of East and Southeast Asia, influencing them. But now with all this escalation, the fact that there will undoubtedly be certainly intensified competition between countries, many of which may not be able to refrain from unilateral actions that are not aligned with international laws. And this could potentially simply trigger a chain reaction where anyone could impose any tariffs or barriers. And let's hope that ASEAN holds on, and let's hope that the EU holds on, at least within these multilateral frameworks. One of the possible options that are currently being actively discussed is similar to what Abe did back in the year 2017, when President Trump, during the initial phase of his first term, decided to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Obama had been preparing for a long time, where 12 countries on both sides of the Pacific Ocean agreed on a very good liberal trade regime. As soon as Trump came to power, he immediately withdrew the US from this system while in office. What did Shinzo Abe do? He quickly and immediately took the initiative, and they created this free trade zone under a slightly different name and with 11 countries. So today they are soon expected to resolve the issue of admitting Britain into this system, and China and Taiwan have also submitted applications. This is clearly a significant sign of the competition in the region, undoubtedly even within the increasingly evident framework of multilateral legal regimes in various aspects and dimensions. And what is happening with Trump is pushing everyone to actively engage even more intensively with these issues in the current political climate. How this will end, we need to wait a little and see.
Well, Another consequence of the logic you laid out regarding the American proposal to increase spending on security and accordingly increase funding for American bases. Logically, sooner or later, everyone will come to the conclusion that essentially why finance American security, American bases, is if it's better to invest in their own tech, their own military complex, keep the money at home. Exactly. Yes. And then a stationary bandit becomes simply not necessary at all in this context in any way. That's why the states are just, honestly, I'm shocked at the speed with which they are dismantling their global power, which stood for 80 years. And now Trump, in just a few weeks, has almost entirely demolished it all completely.
And everyone is watching, and somehow they can't believe their eyes. Well, wait a minute. You were the ones who built this world. But who insisted on Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution? You said, indeed, we absolutely want you to never return to militarism. Japan was producing 10,000 airplanes a year before World War II. You understand? So there's no need for that. Okay, said Japan, we agree. We are ready to go the peaceful route. We will support you. In the region, we will cooperate in every way and, so to speak, coordinate policy with the USA. At the same time, you should kind of give us an umbrella, right? Well, here's your umbrella. And this umbrella, Korea, Thailand, the Philippines, Japan, it's all clear. And suddenly, unexpectedly, everything disappears, right? In the end, ultimately, many nations that were counting on the fact that it's necessary in order to substitute Russian weapons, by the way. After all, many countries have already replaced these weapons with South Korean ones. In recent years, South Korea has almost completely excluded Russia from the competitive East Asian market. But India, for example, it's only now under Biden that the process has started where India began purchasing more American weapons than Russian ones. And this was considered a very important process by everyone, because everyone wants India to be on the side of democracy, and it is a democracy, but to ensure it continues to be a participant in the processes involving the USA, Australia, Japan, and so on. And now it appears now in the current economic climate, it turns out, with such tariffs, again, where to get the dollars to buy these weapons. After all, it turns out that the currencies, the global market, it's not that it has completely collapsed, but it is now very corrupt because no one understands the long-term consequences. Everyone is waiting. And in Asia, too, as I mentioned, they all still kind of think that it was all an illusion. You know, we'll wake up in the morning and it turns out everything is different. We didn't understand something, but it seems to me, because I see what Trump is saying, but today he said something truly fantastic. If it's true, it was written in some Telegram channel, that all countries are kissing me in one place and asking for negotiations. But that's literally brilliant. I can imagine how they will react to this in Asia and in the Middle East as well.
Yes, 100%. And there was another point significantly emphasized today, which is that he announced that migrants will be fined a total of $998 in penalties. And this too. And that this will bring in $1 trillion somehow. And I understand that following this, there will be a chain reaction, shifting the responsibility to the countries from which the migrants came and demanding to collect these debts from them if the migrants do not pay this to the states. They are simply going to the Office of Simple Solutions, as they say. They are following such a path.
It seems like approximately every migrant has $1,000 to pay. This is all some kind of marvelous thing that is indeed completely detached from reality, unfortunately. It's impossible to understand this. What is the goal after all? It's indeed very easy to fall into conspiracy theories.
Well, you know, as someone with a historical education, I look at what's happening, as a matter of fact, with a pessimistic view. Because Trump, it seems to me, belongs to those people who really do what they say. That's exactly what they do. It was like that with Hitler. He wrote Mein Kampf in the mid-1920s. And there, in general, the program was laid out with terrifying clarity, and he really tried to implement it. Then, when they came to power in 1933, many did not believe that he would do it, that they saw what he was doing, they saw the militarization, they saw all his actions, they saw all these tariff wars, how Germany was actively protecting its market and trying to advance its interests, but until the last moment they thought that somehow it would pass. Now, it seems to me we are in a similar situation. That is, everyone understands that this will end in war, well, like a chain of regional wars, which will be catalyzed by these economic problems. Everyone understands that there is no world order anymore. In fact, it doesn't exist. The UN is already an empty shell, and all these institutions created after 1945 are empty shells. But since human consciousness is inertial and doesn't want to leave the warm bath of old beliefs and views, people just haven't quite come to their senses yet, still. But the process has already started in any case. And here is a question from our viewers. How do you, in your opinion, perceive or consider Australia, Canada, India, and probably Britain, and their ability to create some kind of separate market there in terms of their potential? Although I think you already mentioned at the beginning that other countries need to be included here, like those in Asia and Eurasia, and then the picture will become clearer.
Yes. I was just saying that I have a strong feeling that consultations on this important matter are already well underway. It's just that no one is publicizing it yet, so as not to irritate the Americans. But I think that there is no other way out for the countries of the democratic camp, which are part of the G7, and who understand that the consequences of this step seriously violate established rules, procedures, and so on. If there is no order allowing in any situation, chaos is still very bad. Therefore, civilized countries will try to come to an agreement among themselves. The question is, will they agree among themselves to such an extent as to open markets and ensure at least the internal circulation of goods and services, which will allow them to at least survive the initial period that has arisen? Then it will sort of, in a way, kick in later. You see, this nuance also needs to be understood. After all, these tariffs were introduced by Trump and he is enforcing them. After all, where does he get them? Into the budget. That is, this money goes to the state, but who pays them? It's not the state that pays them. Do you understand? And here is how it arose. They are collected from goods. So it turns out that business finances the budget of another country in various ways. Sooner or later, this very business will have a question. Maybe we need to close the factories and produce all of this here ourselves. And if we close down, then everyone understands that you can't close Germany. It won't function at all because the EU has already gone through such a path where they are truly integrated. We know this, but it's the largest market. In fact, 650 million people. So if you indeed connect Canada to it, certainly bring Britain back into the friendly family. Various small details like the countries of the European Free Trade Association, such as Switzerland, Iceland, which are not, but gather everyone, including us, into this as well. And of course, build a bridge to Asia through Australia, New Zealand, Japan, and South Korea, at the very least. I also do not rule out that other countries might want to join, but it would be very important with India. There is just, I expressed this idea while discussing with serious people in Japan. They are a bit doubtful whether it will work out. They fear that the SCO and BRICS will also not be idle and will create their own system. And it's unknown where India will want to go. But most likely more than one such will arise. We will respond to these steps by analyzing each one carefully to ensure a clear understanding and effective outcome. This is indeed a very real chance. That otherwise is impossible. In today's world, after so many years of globalization, it's impossible. Joint efforts and mutual support to pull each other out of the swamp, whether after the aftermath of World War II, or after the Korean and Vietnamese financial crises and so on, and now COVID, which is also well remembered by everyone. You can't just close the borders now and say, we'll produce what we produce ourselves and that's fine, or, acceptable. But that's kind of nonsense. This is most likely not going to happen. How will it be? It's hard for me to say because in each of the countries we mentioned, there is its own internal political situation. In Canada, for example, we know that there are still elections to be held, and in Germany, things haven't completely settled yet. And many other countries are also in their own processes. But if the messages are constructed correctly and the population is explained what's happening, then I think it is possible to avoid such terrible, frightening conflicts and unsettling situations right now, ongoing. Although, if we look at historical analogies, then indeed, with the most negative development of events, the emergence of new armed conflicts cannot be ruled out, which will once again disrupt the markets, like in the 19th and 20th centuries, which is what our vile neighbor dreams of, to return us to the past.
Regarding the vile neighbor and our troubles with them, how does our war and essentially Japan's position look in the context of everything mentioned above? Because we know that Japan has a complicated relationship with Russia. It has territorial issues regarding the Kurils. In short, they have fought. They have certain issues, and essentially this definitely gives them some room for maneuver for us. Well, in principle, Japan has supported and continues to support us, as far as I know.
Supports, and nothing will change. Japan will definitely continue to support us. There is no reason to believe that the position will change, but we must realize that the financial resources that Japan can provide to other countries, not only Ukraine, but in general, as it is one of the largest countries that provides aid to other countries through technical means, through the Technical Assistance Agency, humanitarian aid, and so on. All of this comes from the trade surplus. Yes, the surplus, which is more sold than bought, they use for internal investments, for some of their own large investment projects within the country. For example, if they have an earthquake in Noto, there is a lot of work there. It's a very inconvenient place where people were affected, died, and new infrastructure needs to be built there. For this, the state needs money. All of this comes from there. Therefore, we understand that if this surplus decreases or turns into a deficit, the ability to provide aid will be substantially and therefore greatly limited. Politically, of course, everything will remain. It won't go anywhere. What about relations with Russia? A very important question. Japan's policy consists of 2 points which are traditional for this country. On one hand, there are no changes regarding sanctions, no political contacts, no business, nothing. On the other hand, they agreed to resume interactions, communications, and exchanges in the cultural sphere in various forms. Despite all our explanations, we indeed protest. But such cultural projects, although not widespread, do exist. They will be implemented. Why? Because 2 issues are important for Japanese society. Firstly, visiting the graves of ancestors in the northern territories. As you can clearly understand, Russia is making every possible effort to complicate this purely humanitarian aspect as much as possible in order to. And secondly, fishing near Kamchatka, because Japan is structured in such a way that on one hand, it is very deep, and on the other hand, precisely where it is possible to catch what is traditional for Japanese cuisine, it requires obtaining as if negotiating with the Russians, for which the Japanese, of course, pay them. But they also complicate the negotiations as much as possible. Therefore, there is such a duality, but the position regarding the war will not change in any way. Moreover, I'm almost 100% convinced, well, it's like, definitely, it's not up for discussion that the position within the G7 will not change. And everything that was agreed upon will be in this. The US is not, as they joke themselves. As one joked, he said, well, it won't be the G7. It will be 6.5, for example. But that's not a problem, they say. Don't worry. Regarding the agreements on financial support and political support, we will stand firm. As a kind of positive factor in this situation that has arisen is the drop in oil prices. And it seems, from what I saw, it has already gone below $60, which is, of course, very good. For Russia, this is exactly what should have been done a long time ago, and it could have been done if there had been the will from Biden and so on. Why is this happening now? Because oil and energy resources are needed when there is hope for business development, right? That is when new factories are being built, production is increasing, people are buying more goods, they are in a good mood, more energy is needed for all these goods to function. Today, the mood is bad. All countries, all markets are falling. People stop buying because they don't understand what will happen with money tomorrow, how exchange rates will change. Many goods, they are kind of imported. That is how in the network, financial mechanisms, no one understands anything. Therefore, now oil immediately, as you well know, is very much regulated by spot prices. That is, the price is set every day. It's not like someone agreed on a price and that's it. There's a tanker and it means it's being sold back and forth. And it turns out that everything went down. This is, of course, a huge plus for us. I do not rule out that this will potentially affect the position in negotiations, but it's just a bit too early to say. that they have a margin of safety. Unfortunately, a huge one. They sold so much to India and China that they certainly have certain resources. They are waiting to see if anything changes. Well, let's hope they don't change.
Sergey, thank you very much. I think we will be wrapping up the hour now. We have finished, and the time flew by unnoticed with you. I think we had a successful first broadcast. I received immense intellectual pleasure from truly communicating with a professional like you indeed. And so did our audience. I read all the comments, and they are enthusiastic because you present everything so clearly, specifically, concisely, and to the point. So let's remain in touch and connected and make sure we continue with some regularity.
The number of topics will certainly only increase.
Yes, since you will return like entropy. As far as I remember, you will soon return to Ukraine from Japan, unfortunately, because I think you were very good at defending our interests.
Yes, Friday is my last day in the position. So we can definitely communicate when I am a free bird.
So you will appear in Kyiv, it seems.
Nothing can be ruled out.
All right. Thank you very much indeed, and see you again so much once more.
See you. Thank you. A better world to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your work.